The master formula for getting what you want. The master formula of attainment, stated in popular form, is as follows. You may have anything you want provided that you 1. Know exactly what it is you want. 2. Want it hard enough. 3. Confidently expect to attain it. 4. Persistently determined to obtain it. And 5. Are willing to pay the price of its attainment. We shall now ask you to consider 3 of the above 5 elements of the master formula of attainment vis-a-vis the element of definite ideals, or knowing exactly what you want. The element of insistent desire, or wanting it hard enough. The element of balanced compensation, or being willing to pay the price of its attainment. Each of these 3 elements is highly important and should be carefully examined and considered. Let us begin with the first requisite, i.e., knowing exactly what you want. When you consider this question, exactly what do I want, you will be apt to regard it as one quite easy to answer. But after you begin to consider the question in detail and real earnest, you will discover 2 very troublesome obstacles in your way on the road to the correct answer. The 2 obstacles are as follows. 1. The difficulty in ascertaining a clear and full idea of your desires, aspirations, ambitions, and hopes, and 2. The difficulty in ascertaining which ones of a number of conflicting desires, aspirations, ambitions, and hopes you want more than you do those opposing ones. You will find yourself with the divine discontent of a general dissatisfaction with your present condition, circumstance, possessions, and limitations. You will feel, perhaps strongly, the raw desire of the elemental desire power within you, but you will not have clearly outlined in your mind the particular direction in which you wish that elemental force to proceed into manifestation and expression. You will often feel that you wish that you were somewhere other than you were now, that you were doing something different from what you are now doing, that you possessed things other and better than you now possess, or that your present limitation were removed, thus giving you a wider and fuller expression or manifestation of the power which you feel to be within you. All these general feelings will be experienced by you, but you will not be able to picture clearly to yourself just what other things you really want to take the place of those which are now your own. Then, when you attempt to form the clear picture and definite idea of what you want, you will find you want many things, some of them opposing each other, each offering attractive features, each bidding actively for your favor and acceptance, thus rendering a choice and definite decision very difficult. You find yourself suffering from an embarrassment of riches. Like the perplexed lover in a song, you say, "How happy would I be with either, were there either fair charmer away?" Or like the psychological donkey who was placed at the equidistant point between 2 equally tempting haystacks, and who died of hunger because he couldn't make up his mind which one he wanted most. You may remain inactive because of strong conflicting desire motives. It is because of one or both of the above-mentioned conditions that the great masses of people do not avail themselves of the great elemental urge of desire power. It is there, ready to exert its power, but they lack definite direction and power of decision, and so remain, like the vegetables or the lower animals, content to allow nature to work along the instinctive lines of self-protection, propagation, etc., without employing initiative or self-direction. The few of the race who break these barriers and who strike out for themselves are found to have known very clearly just what they wanted, and to have wanted it hard, and to have been willing to pay the price for attainment. In order to set to work the forces of desire power in a special direction, the individual must make clear an ideal path over which they may travel, as well as to arouse the forces so as to cause them to travel over that path. Self-analysis. You will find that a scientific application of the principle of self-analysis or mental stock-taking will aid you materially in overcoming the 2 great obstacles in the path of attainment, which we have just mentioned. Self-analysis in this case consists of careful analysis of your elements of desire, to the end that you may discover which of these elements are the strongest, and that you may clearly understand just what these strongest elements are really like in character. You are advised to think with pencil and paper. In this work of self-analysis, it will greatly aid you in crystallizing your thought and besides will give a definite and logical form to the results of your work. The following suggestions and advice will aid you materially in this task. Begin by asking yourself the question, what are my strongest desires? What do I want and want to, over and above anything and everything else? What are my highest desire values? Then proceed to think with pencil and paper, and thus to answer your important questions above stated. Take your pencil and begin to write down your strongest desires, your leading wants and want-tos, as they come into your consciousness in response to your inquiry. Write down carefully the things and objects, the aims and ideals, the aspirations and ambitions, the hopes and confident expectations which present themselves for notation in the course of your mental stock-taking. Note all of them without regard to the question of whether or not you ever expect to be able to secure or attain them. Put them all down on a list, no matter how ridiculous and unattainable they may seem to you at the time. Do not allow yourself to be overcome by the magnificent aims and ideals, aspirations and ambitions which thus present themselves. This very existence in your desire nature is, in measure, the prophecy of their own fulfillment. As Napoleon once said, nothing is too magnificent for a soldier of France. You are that soldier of France. Do not impose limitations on your desire list in this way. If a magnificent desire is within you, it should be respected, so put it down on the list. By this feeling of self-analysis, you bring to the surface of your consciousness all the various feelings, desires, longings, and cravings which have been dwelling in your subconscious mind. Many of these deep desires are like sleeping giants. Your exploration of your subconscious mental regions will arouse them, will cause them to sit up and take notice, as it were. Do not be frightened by these waking sleepers. Nothing that you find there is alien to you. Even though you may find it necessary to transmute them or to inhibit them in favor of more advantageous desires at a later stage of your work, do not now deny them in a place on your list. Put them down on paper. The list must be an honest one. Therefore, be honest with yourself in the analysis. At first you will find that your list is a mere or less higgledy-piggledy conglomeration of wants and want-to, apparently having but little or no logical order or systematic relation. Do not let this disturb you, however. All this will be taken care of as you proceed. Order and arrangement will establish themselves almost automatically when the proper time comes. The main thing at this stage is to get all your stronger desires into a list. Be sure to exhaust your subconscious mind of strong desires. Dig out that mind anything and everything that has strength in it. The next step is that of the cold-blooded, ruthless elimination of the weakest desires, with the idea and purpose that in the end there will be a survival of the fittest on your list. Begin by running over your list, striking off the weaker and less insistent, the mere temporary and passing desires, and those which you clearly recognize as likely to bring you but little, if any, permanent satisfaction, continued happiness, and lasting content. In this way you will create a new list of the stronger desires, and those having a greater permanent and satisfactory value. Then, examining this list, you will find that some of these items will stand out from the others by reason of their greater comparative strength and a greater degree of permanent value. Make a new list of these successful candidates, including only those possessing the greatest strength and value to you, and dropping the others from the list. Then continue this process of elimination of the weakest and the least satisfied until you reach that point where you feel that any further elimination would result in cutting away live wood. By this time you will have become aware of a most significant and important fact, namely that as your list has grown smaller, the strength and value of the surviving desires have grown greater. As the old coal miners expressed it, you are now getting down to pay dirt, getting down to the region in which the nuggets and rich ore abide. When you have reached this stage, you will do well to stop work for the time being. This will give you a needed mental rest, and will also furnish your subconscious mentality with the opportunity to do some work for you along its own particular lines. When you again take up your list for consideration, you will find a new general order and arrangement of its items pictured in your mind. You will find that these remaining desires have grouped themselves into several general classes. Your subconscious mental faculties will have performed an important task for you. Then you will be ready to compare these general classes, one with the other, until you are able to select certain classes which seem stronger than the others. Then you will be ready to proceed to the task of eliminating the weaker general classes, making a new list of the stronger ones. After working along these general lines for a time, with intervals of rest and recuperation, and for subconscious digestion and elimination, you will find that you have before you a list composed of but a comparatively few general classes of wants and want-to, each of which possess a far greater degree of strength and value than you had previously suspected. Your subconscious mind has been working its power upon these classes of desires, and they have evolved to a higher stage of strength, definiteness, clearness, and power. You are beginning at last to find out just what you want, and are also well started on your way to wanting it hard enough. Some general rules of selection. In your task of selection, elimination, boiling down, and chopping away the dead wood, etc., you will do well to observe the 3 following general rules of selection. Number 1. The imperative requisite. In selecting your strongest desire for your list, you are not required to pay attention to any fears lurking in your mind that any of the particular desires are apparently unattainable, that they are beyond your power of achievement, and are rendered impossible by apparently insurmountable obstacles. You are not concerned with such questions at this time and place. Ignore them for the present. You are here concerned merely with the question of whether or not your want or want to concerning a certain thing is felt hard enough for you to sacrifice other desirable things. Whether you feel that a particular desire is of sufficient value for you to pay the price of its attainment, even though that price be very high. Remember the old adage, said the gods to man, "Take what thou wilt, but pay for it." If you are not willing to pay the price, and pay it in full, then you do not want it hard enough to render it one of your prime desires. Number 2, the test of full desire. We have told you that desire has for its object something that will bring pleasure or get rid of pain, immediately or remote, for the individual or for someone in whom he is interested. Therefore, in passing upon the comparative strength and value of your respective desires, or general classes of desire, you must take into consideration all the elements of desire noted in the above definite statement, the indirect as well as the direct elements of the personal satisfaction and content. You must weigh and decide the value of any particular desire or class of desires, not only in the light of your own immediate satisfaction and content, but also in the light of your own future satisfaction and content, not only in the light of your own direct satisfaction and content, but also in the light of your indirect satisfaction and content derived from the satisfaction and content of others in whom you are interested. Your future satisfaction and content often depend upon the sacrifice of your present desire in favor of one bearing fruit in the future. You may be so interested in other persons that their satisfaction and content has a greater emotional value to you than the gratification of some desire conceived only by your own direct satisfaction and content. These desire values must be carefully weighed by you. If you leave out any of these elements of desire, you run the risk of attaching a false value to certain sets of desires. You must weigh and measure the value of your desire by the use of the standard of the full content of desire. 3. Seek depth of desire. You will find it advisable to omit from your list all purely superficial and transient feelings, emotions, and desires. They have but a slight value in case. Instead, plunge into the deep places of your mental being of soul. There you will find abiding certain deep, essential, basic, permanent feelings, emotions, and desires. In those regions dwell the wants and the want-tos, which when aroused are as insistent and as imperative as are the want of a suffocating man for air, the want of the famished man for food, the want of the thirsting man for water, the want of the wild creature for its mate, the want of the mother for the welfare of her child. These deep desires are your real emotional elements, the ones most firmly and permanently embedded in the soil of your emotional being. These are the desires which will abide when the transient, ephemeral ones have passed and are forgotten. These are the desires for which you will be willing to pay the price, be that price ever so high in the form of the sacrifice and relinquishment of every other desire, feeling, or emotion. Measure desires by their essential depth, as well as by their temporary weight. Select those which are embedded so deeply in the soil of your emotional being that they cannot be uprooted by the passing storm of conditions and circumstance. The struggle for existence. You are now approaching the final stages of your discovery of just what you want. You now have a list of insistent desires, the survivors in the struggle of existence on the part of your many desires and classes of desires. If you have proceeded earnestly and honestly in your work of self-analysis and selection, you will have a group of sturdy desire giants before you for final judgment. By a strange psychological law, these surviving candidates have taken on much of the strength and energy of those which they have defeated in the struggle. The victors will have absorbed the vitality of those whom they have defeated, just as a savage hopes to draw to himself the strength of the enemies killed by him in battle. Your desire power has now been concentrated on a comparatively small group of desires with a consequent focusing of power. You will now find that your wants and want-tos have arranged themselves into two great classes, vis-a-vis 1. The great class of those desires, which, while different from other desires or classes of desires, are not necessarily contradictory to them, nor directly opposed to them. And 2. The great class of those desires, which are not only different, but are actually contradictory and opposed to other desires or classes of desires. The merely different classes may abide in mutual harmony's existence and relation with, or to each other, just as do light and heat, or the color and odor of a flower. But two contradictory and opposing classes of desires cannot coexist and coordinate their energies in the same individual, both remaining in the forefront. There will be friction in harmony, strife, and mutual indifference. One might as well try to ride two horses moving in different directions as to try to maintain an equal force two opposing or contradictory sets of desires. The two sets, each one pulling in an opposite direction and with equal strength, will bring the will to a standstill. The individual in such a case will either oscillate between the two attracting poles, or else he will come to a dead center between them. Something must be done when you find an opposing set of desires of this kind well to the fore in your category of strong desires. You must set in operation a process of competition from which one set must emerge a victor and the other set be defeated. In this process of competition, you will need to employ your best and keenest powers of analysis and judgment. In some cases, the matter may be settled quickly and the decision easily arrived at, because when your full attention is turned upon the two competitors, one will be seen to stand out so much more clear than the other that the latter will be almost automatically retired. The full power of reason and feeling focused in such cases will usually result in a quick and sure decision. But there are instances in which both the opposing sets of desires seem to possess an equal power and value in your emotional and intellectual scale. Here you are apparently in a condition of the poor donkey previously mentioned, who starved to death because he was unable to decide which of the two haystacks was to be eaten. The matter must be decided by the introduction of an additional element which will add weight to one set or the other, and thus bring down the balance of that particular side. This added element is usually found in one of the other of the following two classes of mental processes: 1. Imagination, and 2. Association. Let us consider each of these. The element of imagination. The imagination employed in the case of the desire conflict now before us usually is very effective in bringing about a decision. In employing it, you have but to imagine yourself first in the actual possession of the object of the one set of desires, and then instead in possession of the object of the second set. In this process you draw upon your own recollection and experience, and upon your recollection of the experience of others. You imagine how would it feel to have attained the object of first this want and want two, and then that one. You place yourself in imagination in a position that you would occupy in case you should attain the object of this desire or of that one. Then you pass judgment as to which seems to be better, that is, to afford the greater degree of satisfaction and content, present and future, direct and indirect. This process has the advantage of overcoming the handicap placed upon a future satisfaction in favor of a present one. The future experience is brought into the field of the present, and thus may be compared with the present experience relieved of the handicap of time. This is a matter of great importance, for ordinarily the present time value of an emotional feeling or desire is far greater than that of a past time or future time value of a similar experience. The test of imagination usually results in 1. Strengthening the present value of a really advantageous emotional feeling and desire, and 2. In weakening the present value of an apparently advantageous but really disadvantageous one. The use of the memory and the imagination is to be highly recommended in the task of deciding the real and actual value of an emotional state or desire. The element of association. The element of association introduced into a desire conflict will often result speedily in a determination and decision in favor of one side as against the other. Association will add strength to one set of desires and will weaken the opposing set in most cases. The association of ideas is that psychological law which binds one set of ideas or mental states to others, so that by bringing one set into consciousness, we tend to bring there also the associated sets. In the present case, we bring into consciousness the associated consequences of each set of desires. You may proceed to apply the test of association as follows. Seek to uncover and discover as many as possible of the associated results of the attainment of the set of desires in question. Strive to think of what else will happen in case you attain that set of desires. This is something like inquiring into the family and social connections of two rival suitors or sweethearts, weighing their respective relations and associations and the probable future consequence of marriage with either one of them. It is always a well, in case of doubt concerning the comparative value of conflicting sets of desires, to consider carefully just what other things are associated with each of the two respective sets of desires. Just what other results are likely to accompany the attainment of the object or end of each set of desires under consideration. In other words, you should ascertain the kind of relation and friends possessed by each of the rival suitors or sweethearts. In this way, you will often find that one of the two apparently equal sets of desires has some very agreeable and advantageous relations and associates, while the other has some very disagreeable and disadvantageous ones. You thus discover, figuratively speaking, just what kind of family you are marrying into, and you thus take stock of the respective associated and related in-laws, friends, associates, and entanglements of each of the suitors. This is of great value, since in spite of the oft-asserted statement that I am not marrying the whole family, one really usually does just that very thing. The idea of the application of the test of association in such cases may be expressed in a few words as follows. The real test of any particular desire depends not alone upon the immediate results likely to accompany its attainment, but also upon the associated and related results which follow in its train of association and correlation, the results which necessarily go with it, and which are so closely bound up with it that they cannot easily be detached from it. In some cases, the test of association will reveal the fact that the price of the attainment of a certain set of desires is excessive, often actually prohibitive. In other cases, on the contrary, you will find by this test that you are getting a great bargain by reason of the extras which go with the thing itself. The object of some desires are thus found to be damaged goods, while those of others are found to have an associated value not apparent to the casual observer. An appeal to the touchstone. In case in which careful analysis, deliberation, the tests of imagination and association, and all other means of weighing and measuring, trying and testing, fail to reveal the advantage of one set of desires over the opposing set, resort must be had to the touchstone of positivity, so often referred to in this instruction. The touchstone by which the positivity of any mental state, thought, feeling, desire, or action is determined is as follows. Will this tend to make me stronger, better, and more efficient? In the degree that any mental state meets the requirement of this test, so is its degree of positivity and consequent desirability. In testing two sets of conflicting desires in this way, you ask yourself, which of these two desires, if attained, will tend to make me stronger, better, and more efficient? This is the test question. The answer should represent your final decision in the matter. The touchstone is your court of last resort to be appealed to when all other tests have failed. Its report represents the best, highest, and most valuable elements, mental, moral, and spiritual, within your nature. All that is worst in you is absent therefrom. It represents your summum bonum, your chief good. The survival of the fittest. By this time your list of desires has resolved itself into a schedule or inventory of a few strong, dominant prime desires, and of a larger number of lesser ones. The strongest desires should be finally tested in order to discover whether they are merely different from each other, or whether they are essentially mutually antagonistic and contradictory. If they come under the latter category, then they must be pitted against each other until one of the pair wins the victory, and one goes down in defeat. For two sets of this kind must not be permitted to dwell permanently in your region of desire. A house divided against itself shall not stand. There must be fought a fight to the finish. One of the opposing sets must be rolled into the dust, while the other stands proudly erect as a victor. The defeated one thereafter must be compelled to say, "After you, monsieur," as our French cousins politely express it. If two sets of desires are merely different, and are not essentially and necessarily conflicting and antagonistic, then they may be permitted to remain dwelling in mutual peace and harmony, at least for the time being. This permission, however, is conditioned by the fact that there must not be too many of such sets occupying the front seats of desire at the same time. The tendency should always be in the direction of concentration and focused energy. You should beware of scattered power and energy arising from a great diversity of desires and aims. If you discover that there are too many strong, different desires left after you have reached this stage of selection elimination, you should carefully weigh each remaining set, subjecting it to the test of memory, imagination, association, and rational judgment, discarding all that are not found profitable and sufficiently advantageous. If you find that any of your desires cost you more than you could get out of them, get rid of all those which do not pay for their keep. Continue until you have left only a comparatively few sets of desires, all of proved value and superlative emotional strength and depth. These should be recognized as well worth the price which you are prepared to pay for their maintenance and support. Treat in the same way any new desires which arise within you. Test them just as you have tested their predecessors, and insist that they prove that they are worthwhile before you decide to keep them. If they cost you more than you get out of them, discard them. Insist that they shall pay their keep and yield you some emotional profit beside. Run your emotional and desire establishment on business principle. You have now finally reached a stage in which you have on your list nothing but your dominant desires, the survivors in the struggle for existence, the survival of the fittest. These dominant desires must therefore rule your emotional realm. Any newcomer must prove its worth by a test of strength with these dominant desires. If it shows its strength and is able to hold its place, very well, and it may be added to the list. Those going down in defeat must be eliminated. This will require strength and determination on your part, but you are a strong and determined individual, or at least are becoming one. The process of self-analysis and selection, which you just considered, will furnish you with two classes of reports. One, it will demonstrate to you your strongest classes of desire, your dominant desires. And two, it will cause you clearly and definitely to picture and form a strong idea of each of such dominant desires. In both reports, it will cause you to know exactly what you want, which is a first requisite of the master formula of attainment.